Yes, school is a dangerous place. I mean, it doesn't hold imminent danger for every student at every moment. In fact, it's quite a safe place, and that's why parents bring their kids to school and can kind of entrust that other responsible adults are guiding their children and taking care of them, and no physical harm will come to them. However, within the confines of these trusted adults, we have a bunch of kids. And wherever there are a bunch of kids, there is mayhem. And if you don't believe that, all you have to do is step out on a recess, right? Recess at school is about as crazy a place as you'll ever find. I remember at recess when I was in grade 6, there was a group of boys out there, and their game was beating each other down with their fists clenched into like a hammer. And they had 3 guys with sledgehammer fists beating down one guy, and the game was how long can he stay up until he's beaten down to the ground. And so you imagine this kind of stuff is happening at school. Well, while you're under the care of trusted adults. But you would
All right,
disagree.
well, I'm not sure if this is just something that happened at your school, but really, I don't think this is something that happens generally at most schools. I think you said it yourself, the fact that parents really to trust the school system to bring their child to school every day and to leave them there for like 6 hours. I think that really just shows how safe it truly is because parents are truly the most protective people on the planet of their children. And I think if they're able to give them up and put them at school, because they can always just homeschool their child or parents could speak out if they think that school is too dangerous. They can always, go to a school board counselor or someone who can make these changes. But because we see the school system functioning fine right now, we see parents happy with bringing their child to school. I think that overall it really proves how school is pretty much safe for everyone who goes. Or even if it's not necessarily safe for everyone in the status quo, there are definitely measures to make sure that it is incredibly
All right,
safe.
all right. You think of parents, I think their kids, by virtue of putting them in a school and making that choice, that they've made the safety choice. Let me tell you, as a parent, that thought never crosses our mind at all. We just want to make sure a kid gets educated and we go off to work. I don't think any parent has ever weighed if their kid is going to be safe at school unless something bad happens, and by then it's too late.
Right. Well, the fact that they don't have to think about whether or not this is safe to begin with before they send their child to school just shows that, it is a very trusted place. Like
Okay,
if
listen,
it was a
we're
place
only
known to
talking
be
about
dangerous.
physical harm. It's also dangerous because this is a place where parents send your kids to become educated, to open their minds, but really they're becoming indoctrinated and learning to become perfect consumers.
But I think it is much more dangerous for a child to not consume all this knowledge, for them to not see these perspectives. Maybe it'll be different from what they're taught at home, but the
Yeah,
fact
but
that they can be
imagine, like,
exposed to
isn't
these.
the knowledge and your education only as good as the teacher delivering it? What if the teacher is some yahoo? Nobody has any control over what happens in the individual classroom.
Well, then you are essentially saying that the
Sorry,
entire.
time's up. I'm just kidding. Sorry. We can keep talking about it.
I'm going to say we should not make contact with them. Um, they have chosen to remain that way. They have chosen to live a life that is in line with nature, that doesn't harm the environment that they are in. They can live peacefully and in harmony with their environment. And I don't think they want any part of what we have to offer. Can we benefit from them? Yes, because maybe they have practices or medicinal knowledge that we could use. But it's up to us to find that. And if they don't want to be found, they shouldn't be found. They shouldn't be contacted. Let them live their lives. I think it's a treasure to have cultures like that have excluded themselves specifically from the outside world. And I think it's amazing that they can still survive in this current system that we
I
have,
think
this
on
global
the point
system.
that it is a treasure to have groups of people like this in our world, we can agree on that. It is true. But I think by contacting such tribes, and it doesn't have to be in an egregious, violating way, but by respectfully making contact with these tribes, we can actually preserve their tribes and help them figure out ways of sustaining their tribe and reaching into the future. Because by their own trajectory, they're dwindling. They've been getting less and less, and we're down to, like, small groups. I think the Sentinelese in the Indian Ocean are down to 50 to 100 people after 62,000 years of existence. They've been around longer, like 12 times longer than the Chinese culture, down to 50 people. And so I think contacting them in a respectful way is actually going to kind of enhance what you're talking about, preserving this wonderful culture that we treasure, and maybe maybe we can do it in a way that it's not horrible for them.
Maybe is the key word, and I think that's where my fear is that it's not going to go that way. And yes, there are cultures that are dying. I don't know what we can do about that. If they choose,
said
we
that they
have to
don't.
respect their decision, essentially.
But you don't know, like you said, they don't know what we have to offer. They don't know what we have to offer. You said that they don't want what we have to offer. But how do you know what you don't want? You don't know what you don't know. It could be that if we made a gentle and respectful contact, that there's lots of things that we could offer each other, and that we could mutually benefit from. But we will never know unless this contact is made.
But what I keep hearing is if and maybe and possibly, potentially, and the other side of, and those are all, you're presenting them as positives, and I'm presenting those as that there's potential, huge negatives to those too. The Western influence has, so often been negative.
Clearly, I have a vested interest. I should recuse myself from this because I have benefited from government funding, and certainly my clients have benefited from government funding. Should the government fund the arts? Absolutely, because that enables our country to have displays of art and culture that we could not normally have, or to bring our arts and cultures to international audiences. The culture, yes, the government should fund the arts. It's also nice if the arts can fund themselves, but arts, fundamental to the arts is the creation of things that are much, much bigger than art is about creating things that are as beyond imagination, or as expressive of imagination as possible, and money is only a constraint.
All right, so you said fundamental to arts is the creation of things. So on that point, we can agree. But that's why I think governments cannot fund the arts. And if you think about authoritarian governments, when there's an authoritarian leader that takes over, usually the first thing they go after is the cultural, I guess, professionals, the people that are shaping the culture, the artists. Because when you can control the artists, you control the message. And so with every revolution, there has to be kind of a cultural component. So art is powerful in the world, in a culture. And so to let a government control it, to get involved with it, shape it. I mean, I think of the metaphor as a record label, an artist turning to a record label who has deep pockets and can fund the artist, but then all of a sudden feeling trapped and controlled and not being able to produce what you said is fundamental, their creation. And so I think artists will be limited if the government then creates a system where some artists get funded and some don't.
That is the actual system. Some artists get funded and some artists don't. And it could be argued that the government does have some control over the type of art that's being produced. But funding is not inherently control of the arts, at least not in Canada.
Yeah, but isn't the art world itself, like you said, aren't there like really rich artists and benefactors that could feasibly fund the people that are coming up in their genre? I think that the art itself will suffer if there's funding, because then it'll become a game of who can kind of secure the funding, who's good at filling out applications, and who's really I guess persistent, and not who's the best artist and who's the most creative.
Unfortunately, that what you're saying is true.
To be very clear, I do not think that human beings should have microchips linked directly to their brains at random. To begin, I think that if we were focusing specifically on disability and about the restorative power of microchips, this would be a different debate. But if we're talking about microchips as simply allowing people to have these sort of cyborg capacities to increase their, who knows, their mental functions, their physical functions, I don't think that this is responsible for a few reasons. One, I think that the companies who are putting these microchips into people's brains would have an exorbitant and undue amount of power that they are not accountable for. And secondly, I think that the disparities that this could create in terms of human ability is profoundly unfair. I think that if these microchips were available to people who could afford them, and that they could in turn create greater capacities and greater abilities, then I think it would create a disparity among human beings and create a sort of two-tier society that is unsustainable.
Okay, well, in terms of companies having being unaccountable and being too powerful, I think that's already the case. And so, maybe having a microchip planted in our brains will kind of even out the playing field and give each person kind of bigger abilities, faster processing speed, and more chance to thrive in the workforce. I'm not sure if that's going to make a difference, but in terms of the disparity between people and having maybe widening the chasm between the rich and the poor, is this going to become a luxury for the rich? Well, I think if it was adopted as a governmental kind of strategy, or then the government could end up paying for this, and it could be a tax covered expense that and all human beings would be in on it. I think in that case, if everybody's doing it, I mean, a fish doesn't know it's in the water, and if everybody has got this microchip planted in our brain, doesn't that somehow kind of even out the playing field?
I think no. You said that companies already have this sort of undue power over our lives and that they're not accountable for it. But this only makes that worse. Just because it's bad now doesn't justify making it worse in the future. And we talk about this idea that this could elevate our capacities to the point that we'd be able to challenge these companies. But if we're so dependent on their product,
right now we are so susceptible to being, I guess, scammed and manipulated. But if we have a super fast thinking ability, or can't we just cut through the BS and understand when companies are out to get us, and wouldn't that help us sort of?
Well, I think if they can take it away at any time, then maybe not, if our capacities are dependent on a product that is controlled by another independent company that could be removed from our brains at any time, then we don't really own that capacity to begin with.
I'm going to say yes. I think that, the buck stops with the guy on top. And I'm going to use the analogy of the president. A lot of things happen in a country, and the president has a lot of ministers that are responsible for different, aspects of the bigger picture. But at the end of the day, if something goes horribly wrong, the responsibility lies with the person who's in charge of everything. And that person has a duty to make sure the system works effectively, that everyone's doing their job right. Forget who it was. Truman, the American president, that had a sign on his desk that says the buck stops here. So, and I think that's he was that guy on the set of this movie. And ultimately, when you're shooting up guns in a movie, of course there's somebody in charge for a prop person for those guns, but the buck has to stop with him.
I don't think so. I think a lot of times you see is that oftentimes in business and in government, it's the person who's responsible who will get charged. It's never going to be the big boss. If there's an issue in the secretary, and like perhaps there's a case of sexual assault, you're not going to blame the president if it was the president's I guess associate, or I think it has to be assigned to the person who's in charge. The weapons expert for this movie, the person who put the ammunition into the gun, is the one who should get charged. I don't see why Alec Baldwin, unlike any other actor who has to fire props, I don't know why you would, consider yourself, put it in your shoes. If you were handed a gun and say, all right, let's shoot this scene, you're handed a gun by the weapons expert and you shot it off into the distance and you killed someone. Do you think it'd be fair that you were charged for it, even though you were told what to do? You were given the scene, you had to perform. Yes, he was the director, but he wasn't the weapons expert. He wasn't the person who was supposed to make sure the gun was not. He wasn't supposed to make sure the gun was safe. It was someone else's.
I see where you're coming from, but ultimately, by the way, this is the open round. At the end of the day, he was in charge, and there's a victim who lost her life, and her kids lost their mother. So there has to be justice. There has to be some closure.
Do you think justice is locking him away for 14 years? What will that do for the family?
Well, I think it sets a precedent, and to make sure that future directors don't have this kind of negligence, and so that this type of thing won't happen again. And I mean, this happens all the time in the legal circles, that when it happens to one person, that becomes the precedent, and now there's a law for the next person.
But we'd be getting the wrong person anyways. We wouldn't be getting the person who's responsible. We would just be getting the person who's it's stuck on. So we
Well,
wouldn't
you
be
said
helping
it's
anyone.
never the big boss that gets charged. It's always some underling. But isn't that just a form of scapegoating? And so
No,
why
it's
should
the
they
person who's
scapegoat?
responsible. The person who's responsible deserves to get charged. If you're not responsible for it, why should you get charged with it just out of you shouldn't we want to avoid being the lamb. Like that's what we want to avoid in society.
Okay, good job. Yes, I think AI chat, first of all, we cannot resist the tide of change. And then every time a new technology enters the world, there's a demographic of people that resist the tide of change. But social media itself, having Facebook accounts and Instagram has kind of replaced the need to keep a diary. So now everybody has a record of their life, and people railed against it when it first happened, and now it kind of seems more useful. So perhaps over time, AI chat, the benefits of it will become more apparent. But from what I can see now, it looks like it's supplanting the need to write. And from an educational point of view, that's a little bit scary. However, I think most people are natural speakers more than they are writers. And our current education system kind of favors people who can write. And I think we'll have a much fairer representation of people's skills and mastery of subjects if we allow them to speak. And when we take writing out of the equation, and then there's a bigger premium on speaking, and more people can speak well than write.
I disagree that the world can be a better place where people are better speakers and writers. I think what we've seen over history is once people had the skill of literacy and being able to read and write, and especially it changes the way the mind works as well. And I think it creates a more subtle thinking patterns and the way of looking at the world, having a critical thinking. In fact, I think that in an oral world, we are already in a world where orality is becoming dangerous, where people that are good at rhetoric can really rise up and become wield a lot of power. And it's a dangerous world to live in when the speech is our measure of intelligence and leadership, or etc. Where the written word creates a world where there's more room for critical thought and for not.
But if some people are so much better at speaking than others, and they have an unfair advantage in debates, can't that advantage be eliminated if someone can enter the debate with AI generated ideas and be able to kind of stand their ground with such a person?
Yeah, but I think more generally when we have a machine sort of which has to learn from something, it's learning from us essentially, right? And it's learning our own biases, it's learning our own ways of doing things, it's learning our own weaknesses. So it really becomes a manipulative tool, and we're already seeing this with AI.
It will change the way our mind works, but that presumes that our mind are somehow devious or not working well. Is it perhaps that maybe the AI will improve the way our mind works and give us more options to think about, and maybe we can use it as a foundation of our thoughts and not
I think like any tool, if it's used properly, but I think the history of humanity shows that we don't use tools well.
All right, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm going to say yes. I think it can be eradicated. For the most part, I don't think you can eradicate racism from the hearts of people. And people are racist for all sorts of different reasons. Some people inherit it from their parents, and some people have a terrible experience with a certain culture group, and some people don't know how to treat people, and they just sort of categorize them according to cultural stereotypes. But can racism be eradicated from a system, an institution like the government or the police force? I say yes, because those systems have jobs, and you can simply remove someone's job, and that motivation, I think, is strong enough for people to reevaluate their racist views, and whether they want to keep those views private or let them spill over into the workplace. So I think just as long as we're dealing with a system like the police force, and someone's entire career and livelihood hangs on the line, and you can remove that from them, I think that's going to be a strong motivation for people to think twice before being racist.
I admire, your optimism, or maybe a lot of people might say a sense of idealism when it comes to your view. Yes, systemic racism can be eradicated. I have to say, I don't believe it can at all, because if the Black Lives Matter movement, a huge part of it was even just raising awareness of systemic racism. In the year, 2023, where we're at right now, yeah, then there's no chance of it being eradicated. We've got awareness. Are you kidding me? Yeah, duh. We know that there's racism in institutions. And if those institutions had been doing their jobs, then there wouldn't be now, would there? Because we've been knowing about racism for a very long time. So,
well, I'm a
it's always gonna be
proponent
there.
of the idea where there's a light switch that can be turned off, there's one that can also be turned on. And so 20 years ago, when we were kids, there was so much pollution and people throwing paint into the ground and kids smoking in the schoolyards, but attitudes changed, and there's smoking has become a taboo simply because people's attitudes have changed over time.
Smoking might have become a taboo, but I'll tell you, vaping hasn't. You know, if it's not one thing, it's the other. The point is, people are always going to satisfy their very own urges. And if their urge is to be racist or to feel superior to somebody else, and that type of urge, the gratification of which has been not just congratulated, but supported by society through systemic racism, then they're going to do it.
I also think that we're dealing with a whole new crop of kids coming up, this next generation, that are much more conscientious and aware of inequities and things like that. On its face, I think trophy hunting just doesn't seem moral at all. We talked about this, you know, on its face, it just doesn't seem right. And then you look at these two people, the Trump sons, they go get driven around the savannah, and when they see a large game animal, the driver stops, they point their gun, and they kill it, and then cut off its tail for a trophy. Does that seem right? It doesn't seem morally correct. I remember Donald Trump lifted the ban that Obama put in on hunting bears in their den while they're sleeping. Does that seem right to shoot a bear while it's sleeping in its den? Is it morally correct? I don't think so, because, you know, I think bears have a certain, you know, when they go to hibernate, they expect to sleep for a entire season. And if you start shooting them in their den, that's going to create a kind of anxiety for them to do what is in their nature to do. And that's certainly going to affect, I don't know, their genetic coding or their responses. It just seems like we're reducing animals to commodities and collectibles when we do this.
Yeah, and you make a good point, Tamer. Now, I want to say from a moral perspective, you know, we are humans. This is our species, right? And while your points are valid, local populations, let's take Africa for an example, right? Let's take Namibia. There have been surveys done that say that, you know, 91% of like 160 local individuals say that they would not support a ban on trophy hunting because it funds their livelihoods, it's jobs, it's the leftovers are given to the communities for meat. And there are even like government programs where animals are auctioned off, and these are specific animals. You're not just driving around and shooting something. They're specific animals that are either aggressive or past their reproductive age, that are auctioned off for a ton of money. We're talking like hundreds and thousands of dollars to, you know, fund that thing, the trophy hunting, and then conservation takes that money.
You say that there are certain communities that are not opposed to trophy hunting because they benefit from the meat of a giraffe or a rhino that's been killed. But I get that, but couldn't the government step up and provide a real source of food for these communities? Like if they actually had a working government, couldn't we kind of eliminate the need for trophy hunting?
Well, I think because it's such a well-established thing now, and it's more than just food, right? Of course, it's livelihoods, it's jobs. It brings people there, and it funds, you know, like let's say it reduces poaching as well, right? Because there's more regulation. There's conservation involved in that.
By hunting like this, when you hunt a trophy animal, you're looking for the best, the largest, the most magnificent specimen of that animal. And when you're hunting that animal for its prominent and adaptive features, aren't we kind of affecting the gene pool? Because the rhino with that horn, that needs a horn to fight off males and to attract females, if you hunt the biggest horn, the next generation is going to have a smaller horn.
I'm going to say no. I don't think there should be a legal drinking age. I think this is an example of kind of big government and the government wagging their finger and getting all moralistic on us. But there's lots of countries that don't make a big deal about the drinking age. Italy comes to mind, where it's not uncommon for, children to drink a cup of wine at the dinner table. And what we don't see in Italy is kids binge drinking as soon as they turn 19. This is what we see here in our universities. And every year in university, kids end up in the hospital getting their stomachs pumped because they've been waiting their whole life to get their first drink. And then finally, when they're allowed to, when they've hit the legal drinking age, they overdo it. And so, when you make something forbidden from kids, we know how kids behave. Kids, if you say, no, you can't do it, that's the only thing they're going to want to do. So it encourages kind of rebellious attitudes and binge drinking, which we don't like to see.
Well, the problem with that logic, Coach Tamer, is that if we say when you ban something, it means more people want to do it, so we shouldn't ban things, then why don't we let children own guns? Why don't we let children drive cars? There has to be limits on harmful substances in order to stop the children from getting their hands on those substances in the first place. And we talk about alcohol. Alcohol is very harmful for young people. I mean, nobody wants an 11-year-old to be drinking a bottle of wine. I hope that's something we agree on would be very harmful for that 11-year-old. They probably would hurt themselves, get up to no good, and do damage to themselves. And so we need to stop that. We need to ban that, make that illegal, and that way we can punish anyone who gives the bottle of wine to the 11-year-old to stop them from doing it. You talk about binge drinking. The problem there is, these 19-year-olds should take some responsibility for their own actions. They shouldn't get to blame society when they end up drinking too much, when they know full well that that's going to do harm to them and end up with their stomachs getting pumped or committing mayhem or whatever. We should put the fault where it lies.
Your argument presumes if there's a ban, that if there's no ban, that people would just drink wantonly every day. But there's still, people have their own judgment and they have extra layers of kind of authority.
But alcohol is addictive. Alcohol is addictive, Coach Tamer. So maybe they start with their own judgment, but they have a drink and then they have another and then they have another and then they can't stop themselves.
Well, chocolate is addictive. Should we ban chocolate too? Can we give people some credit to have a sense of wellness for themselves? And parents are going to have something to say about this.
Do you let your children eat as much chocolate when your children were 6, 7, 8, 9? Did you let them eat as much chocolate as they wanted and say leave it to their own?
As their parent, I can discuss with my children the pros and cons, and I don't require a government to ban it for them not to do it. All right, let's stop right there.
I think, yeah, definitely. Parents should definitely encourage their children if they want to, pursue YouTube or, if their goal is to become insta-famous. I think the same way parents should encourage their children to do whatever they want to do. I think this really is no different. Like, what makes, wanting to be a YouTuber different from wanting to go to med school? Like, the parent might think, this might not be sustainable. It might not actually work. You might fail along the way. It might take a lot of time. But really, that's simply the same for every single career. And med school costs so much money, yet parents still, encourage their children to go. It costs so much discipline, yet, a lot of the kids don't have this discipline to really encourage them to go through the entire process. So I think it doesn't matter what profession they want to do. It just matters that if this is truly what the child wants to do, they will put in the effort if this is really what they want to do. And if it isn't, and if it ends up failing, this is also a really, really good lesson for them because they can fail in any profession.
I completely disagree. As a parent, if my children started showing signs of wanting to become YouTubers or instant famous, that would be a big red flag for me. You said that what's the difference between a kid wanting to go to med school or aspiring to be a YouTuber? Well, for one thing, if you're in med school, your career is going to be helping other people to save their lives, to devote yourself to service, which I find a noble pursuit. But being a YouTuber it's about turning the kind of the spotlight onto yourself. It's all about me. So it's just kind of like shameless self-promotion. And how good is that for the soul? Like, what service are you providing for the world? And how can you equate that to being a surgeon or a doctor? This idea about discipline, maybe not all kids have discipline to go to medical school or law school, but I would think to actually break through and become a YouTuber and do it better than all those other kids who are trying also requires some form of discipline. And would you want your kids spending all their waking hours trying to become a YouTuber or trying to become a doctor?
Well, if you do agree that it requires discipline either way, wouldn't you agree that it would make disciplining the child a lot easier if this is what they truly want to do? If they really if they're really passionate about making videos, they're passionate about like creating content. Why would you make them study for 6 hours a day?
Okay, because as a parent, I know that one of your objectives as a parent is to make sure that your kid has kind of some substance and has an emotional foundation to live their life off of. And being a YouTuber just seems so shallow. Like, what is it? How's that going to fill their soul and create any kind of foundation?
Well, I think you're painting being like a YouTuber or an influencer in like a very negative light. I think you mentioned that it's very dishonorable compared to things like surgeons, and I think to an extent this is probably true. But if we didn't have this entertainment in our lives, how would we
I'm only
like
thinking
seek
this way
this?
because I'm staring at Kim Kardashian, who made a name for herself by shaking her booty on the camera, and now is raising a bunch of spoiled kids with an ex-husband rapper who's become a white supremacist Nazi. Sorry, Kim Kardashian. Please don't sue me. Oh my goodness. Sorry, Jake Paul.